So on 432 it says, Lo siachare, four lines to the bottom. Lo siachare rabim l'raos. Do not follow the majority to do bad. Lo sane al riv lintos achare rabim lahatos. So Rashi goes through a whole explanation over here. And at the end of the day, the word achare rabim lahatos, the expression achare rabim lahatos, teaches us that we're in Mishpatim, Perek Chav Gimel Pasuk Beis. Achrei Rabim Lahatos, that you follow the majority. And there are rules in a Basin of how you follow a majority. There are three levels of Basin, first of all. There's a Basin of, there's a Basin of three, which judges, a Basin of three judges monetary law. For monetary law, you assemble a Basin of three judges. There's a Basin of 23 that they had in every city, and they could judge capital offenses. Now, in a capital offense case, if you get a ruling of 12-11 to convict, to put him to death, they keep deliberating until you get a majority. You need at least a majority of two. In order to convict, you get in order to, what's the word, not convict, to?
Sentencing? Condemn.
Condemn, thank you, condemn, that's the word. In order to condemn, you need a majority of two, which you can never have, so you're going to have either 13 to 10. You're going to have at least a 13 to 10 ruling to condemn. In order to let him off, what's the word?
Exonerate.
Exonerate, better word, that's too fancy. In order to acquit, that's the word. In order to acquit, then you need only a majority of one. What's exonerate? What's the difference between acquitting and exonerating other than showing off your vocabulary? What's the difference between the two? Exonerate is in court or exonerate is outside of court also?
I think I can't see a difference.
Okay. No, nafkamina. Oh, I created a monster. The what do you call it? No nafkamina. Whenever you say that, you invoke some Aramaic. You just sound so knowledgeable and so righteous. Yeah. So acquit means to acquit you need only a 12-11. Then you have the Sanhedrin of 71. Then there's the Sanhedrin of 71. Now in the Gemara Bab Mitzia on page Nun Tes Amud Beis. All right, there's a famous machlokas here in the Beis Medrash. It's on Daf Nun Tes Amud Beis, and this is regarding a certain type of clay oven. And the question is whether, when a clay oven reduced to a certain size, if what happens, it no longer makes things tameh or tahor. That's the technical end of it. I'm not going into that. But the Gemara says like this. Let's stay with this, gentlemen. The Gemara says that Rabbi Eliezer said it's tahor. In the Chachamim, the majority said this type of oven is tameh. So the Gemara says, Rabbi Eliezer then says the following. If the halacha is like me, charuv ze yochiach. You ever hear this Gemara with the famous argument? He says the carob tree, a charuv is generally considered a carob tree, will prove that I'm right. Says the Gemara, nekar charuv mimkumo meya ama. The carob tree uprooted itself and it flew 100 amas. The Amri law, and others say Arba Me'oz Arma. Some say we actually flew 400 amas. But one thing everybody agrees on, it flew. That's correct. It's only machlokas how far. Right? Doesn't say whether it flew. Nobody came along and said, no, it didn't. Come on, you're joshing. Nobody said that. Everybody agrees the carob tree flew. Now, what would you say if I said, you guys asked me about a certain hefsher? You think that's kosher? Those corn chips are kosher? I say they're treif. And if the halacha is like me, this bookcase will go flying 100 amas. And the bookcase goes flying 100 amas, then what would you say? I guess it's treif. What's that? What'd you say?
You can't prove it based on a bookcase.
Oh, that's not what you would say. That's only because you learned the Gemara. Otherwise, you would have said, yes, sir, anything else. I don't want to get the bookcase landing on me. That's what you would have said, but you only happen to know the Gemara here. Amrulo, they said to him, Ein mevi'in raya min ha'charav. Don't bring us raya. Don't bring us proof from a carob tree. Right? We're impressed, but don't bring proof from a carob tree. So okay. Im halacha kamosi, he said, if the halacha is like me, amas hamayim yochichu. The stream of water will prove I'm right. Chazru amas hamayim lacharem. The water started flowing in the opposite direction. Now that's impressive. Amrulo, nice. However, ein mevi'in raya me amas hamayim. Don't bring proof from streams, river streams. Achazar amar lahem im halacha kamosi koslei beis hamedrash yochil. The walls of the beis medrash will prove that I'm right. Hitu koslei beis hamedrash. The walls started collapsing. Gar bahem Rabbi Yeshua. So Rabbi Yeshua yelled at the walls. Amar lahem. Im Talmidei Chachamim minatzchin zeh b'halacha. Talmidei Chachamim are arguing about halacha. Atem mativchem. What are you getting involved in this argument for? Right? So then the walls had a dilemma. Lo naflu mipnei kvodo shel Rabbi Yeshua. They didn't collapse out of respect of Rabbi Yeshua because he said don't. V'lo zokfu mipnei kvodo shel Rabbi Elazar. They couldn't straighten out because Rabbi Elazar said do. V'adayin matin v'omdin. They are still in a slanted position. There's a base medrash somewhere where there are walls that are in that position, somewhere. That's what the Gemara says. Chazar v'amar mim halacha kamosi. All right, I've had enough. The halacha is like me. Mina shamayim yochichu. They'll prove it from shamayim. Yotzes habaskol, a heavenly voice came out. V'amar malachem eitzel Rabbi Eliezer. What are you starting up with Rabbi Eliezer? Halacha kamosi v'chol makom. The halachas of Rabbi Eliezer everywhere. No, what more do you want? A heavenly voice. A heavenly voice. Amad Rabbi Yoshua, Rabbi Yoshua stood up. The Amar lo bashamaymi. Sorry, Torah is not in heaven. My lo bashamaymi. What does that mean? What was his implication? Amar Rabbi Yirmiyah shekvar nitna Torah me Har Sinai. The Torah is already given to us. It's from Har Sinai. Einanu mashgichin bebaskol. We don't pay attention to baskols. Baskol's nice, but we don't pay attention to baskols. Shekvar kosavta behar Sinai baTorah. You said it wrote in Har Sinai. Acharei Rabbi Blahatos. This pasuk in our parsha. It says you go after the majority. Don't give me no carob trees and water and walls and everything else, and certainly a baskol. Down here. Says the Gemara. Now listen to this statement. Ashkechei Reb Nosson le'Elio. Rabbi Nosson ran into Elio Hanavi. That's Elio. Amar le. My Ovid Kucha Bricha Vayishaita. What was Kodesh Baruch Hu doing at that time when this argument was going on in the base measures? What was Rabbi Kiva? What was Kodesh Baruch Hu doing? Amar le kachayich. He smiled. Ve'amar nitzchuni banai. My children have defeated me. Kodesh Baruch Hu smiled. He said, "My children have defeated me." And then they went. They took everything that Rabbi Elazar said was tahor. They rendered it. They burnt it. Uberchuhu. Berchuhu is a euphemism. They put him in Cherem. Wow. They put Rebbe Elazar in Cherem. That's what the Gemara says here. So there are a couple of major problems with the Gemara here. Problem number one is, if the halacha is not like Rabbi Eliezer, so why did Kodesh Baruch Hu do these things for him? Why did the Chorav go flying? And certainly why the heavenly voice comes out? Why did the heavenly voice come out? Number one. And even more, the heavenly voice came out and said that the halacha is like Beis Hillel over Beis Shammai. Right? And we pass it like Beis Hillel. And Rabbi Yeshua says, sorry, lo b'shamayim. We're not in heavens. Number one. So why did it come? If that's not halacha, why did it come out that way? Number one. Number two is the second question. Why did Kodesh Baruch Hu smile? What was he happy about? And number three is the biggest question of all. If that's the way we work, so why was Rabbi Eliezer arguing? He also knew the pasuk in the Torah. There's no chiddush over here. Rabbi Yeshua quoted a pasuk. The pasuk is later in Dvarim, lo b'shamayim. Torah is not in heaven. And Rabbi Yirmiyah goes and say, yeah, because what he meant was this pasuk right here in Shmos. That Acharei Rabbi Eliezer learned the Chumash. So why? Didn't Rabbi Eliezer know that? What's going on here? How could he even have such an argument? Good question, right? So what's going on here? And number four, why did they excommunicate him? Number four, why did they put him in Cherem? What, because somebody argued, so you put him in Cherem? I mean, I would put half my shear in Cherem, right? That's only on Sunday. And then the other half I put in the Cherem on Monday, right? And on Tuesday I wouldn't show up because everybody's in Cherem. You're not allowed within Dalet Amos. We have to zoom my shear because you're not allowed within 4 Amos. What's going on here? What's going on? It doesn't make any sense. But the answer is like this. The answer is that, let's start from the bottom first. Why did they put him in Cherem? They put him in cherem because, in the Sefer, I think the Sefer Chinuch says, they put him in cherem because the idea of following the majority is so fundamental that if you fight against that idea, you could uproot the entire Torah. Because we have to paskin shilas all the time. You have a Basin, you have a Sanhedrin. How are we ever going to reach a conclusion? We have a rule how you reach a conclusion. You reach a conclusion because it's based on the principle of Achri Rab Lahatos. If somebody doesn't accept that, then you're running the risk of undermining the entire Torah. And they felt that Rabbi Eliezer is arguing too vehemently. You're allowed to say your opinion. You heard the majority says, we have that. We just had a Mishna, Rabbi Akiva versus the Tanna Kama. We pass him like the Tanna Kama, not like Rabbi Akiva, because he's an individual. Cedar, in all the Mishnas, you have that all over the place, where you have an individual arguing with the Rabbi. Fine. But once we pass him, you back off and you accept the psak of the Rabbi. They felt that Rabbi Eliezer had crossed the line and he was arguing too vehemently. And that threatens the Torah. We've got to create and set a precedent over here. There's a line, you don't argue with the majority. You accept what the majority says, you don't argue too much, otherwise you are a threat to Torah. This is the Dimon Forshim explain. Okay. So then why did HaKadosh Baruch Hu do this and start trouble? Why did HaKadosh Baruch Hu do this and start trouble? And then why does HaKadosh Baruch Hu smile later? After starting the trouble, HaKadosh Baruch Hu smiles. So imagine a father is teaching his son Gemara. Father learns Gemara with his son. It starts out, the kid translates, the kid learns. Then one day, when the kid is already 10 years old, the father's learning a Tosos with him. And also the kid says, the father explains the Tosos, and the kid says, yeah, but that doesn't make sense, because then what do you do with Hazeh? And the father, oh, he's right. He bested me. My 10-year-old bested me in a Tosos. How do you think a father feels? Great. Are you lost? Are you lost? But once you see the kid chopped it, then you're happy. What was really going on here? HaKadosh Baruch Hu threw a curveball at them. This was so fundamental, HaKadosh Baruch Hu tested them. Here's a carob tree. Not impressed. Here's the stream of water. Not impressed. Here come the walls of the basement. Not impressed. A baskol. Ooh, a baskol. Then we go up to the Ari mikveh in Sfas and we're all good to go because there's a baskol. No. You want to go to the mikveh, go to the Ari mikveh. That's fine. You can wear tchelis if you want. Lo b'shamayim. We're not impressed. We're not impressed. Torah is given to us down here. And HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, Nitzchuni banai. That means you've understood what I wanted. I was throwing you the hardest test possible to see if you really understand, because this is the test to see if you're going to be able to uphold Torah throughout the generations. How are you going to uphold Torah? How are you going to uphold Torah? You better be aware that no matter what I throw at you, they used to do this in the military. Where a guy, the general says to the guy, you stand here, and I want you, don't let anybody in. You're the sentry, don't let anybody in. And the next 10 minutes later, a colonel comes by. He says, I got to go in there. Sorry, sir, I'm not allowed to let you in. He says, you're corporal. If you don't get out of the way, I'm going to have you court-martialed. You're going to suffer for the rest of your life. That's a test. Are you supposed to let him in or you're not supposed to let him in? You're supposed to do what the general said. Kosh Baruch Hu threw the hardest test at them in the bay. Threw them a baskol, because this is such a fundamental that they've got to know that you do not budge from this rule. Achri rabim lahatos. That's what the Gemara says. What was Rabbi Yeshua saying? Rabbi Yeshua was saying, that there's never been a posek in history. You come to a posek and you say to the posek, my fleishik spoon fell into my milchik pot, or my something went into the milchik oven, fleishik this, whatever shaila. There's never been a posek in history that said just 1 second. I got the baskol. It says that you could eat the spoon. You can use the spoon. Don't worry about it. It's fine. That's not how we paskin halacha. How do you paskin halacha? You paskin b'chavon of the Shulchan Aruch, because the Torah has given us the Sinai. What do we do down here? What we do down here is based on what the Shulchan Aruch says. The Torah is given to us to decide. That's why people always ask, how do you know you're right? How do you know the poskim are right? When there's something that we're not sure about, because in the chain of tradition, maybe a halacha has been forgotten. Right? And people ask that all the time. Maybe something's been forgotten. How do you know that you're doing the right thing? The answer is, because the right thing is what the halacha says becomes the right thing. So that if the poskim down here paskin a certain way, that becomes the halacha. So if something is forgotten, we have a way of reproducing the halacha. What's the way you reproduce the halacha? You reproduce the halacha based on what the opinion is, the majority opinion is down here. There's a ritva in Eruvin on the Gemara that says that there's a machlokas Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel, and a heavenly voice came out and said, Elu ve'elu divrei Elokim chayim. Both of them are the words of the living God, but the halacha is like Beis Hillel. So what's the famous question? How can they both be right? How can you possibly both be right? Yeah, we paskin like Beis Hillel. Good question. Everybody wonders about this, right? Okay, so I'll show you. We are the board of directors of the Pilot Pen Company. Right? This is our new model pen. And we want to give a description of what this model looks like. This is the new, for the shape of the pen. We want to give it the name, the shape of this pen. This is our new, I would call it the rocket-shaped pen, for example. Now, we're the board of directors. You can say what somebody else said, or you could come up with your own description. Jake?
Pointy.
The new pointy-shaped pen. Blue-shaped pen. We'll come back to that, because blue is not a shape. What do you say, Ron? Linear-shaped pen. Matt?
Skyscraper.
Skyscraper-shaped pen.
Beanstalk-shaped pen.
Beanstalk-shaped pen.
Mountain.
Moon?
Mountain.
Mountain.
Oh, mountain-shaped pen. You could say the same thing somebody else said, right?
Blade.
Blade-shaped pen. Okay, now, what's happened here is, yes, anything creative and original from some French philosopher or anything?
Pass.
Pass-shaped pen, okay? So, Tzvi, what do you got?
Pen.
Pen-shaped pen. Oh, these are the guys from my shear. Very creative. That's terrific. That's real. That's really original. Now, what happens is you go around, and nobody said anything incorrect. This is mountain-shaped. It's pointy-shaped. It's what did you say, Jake? Pointy. You said pointy. I said it's rocket-shaped. Now, you're not wrong, and you're not wrong, and you're not wrong. But we got to market it. How do we market it? What are we going to say? Well, we'll find the majority. Let's say 5 of us in the room have said it's the pointy-shaped pen, right? Nobody said the rocket shape. Only what? So we'll go with the majority. That means you're right, and you're right, and you're right, because your angle, what you said, what did you say, Cedar?
I didn't say.
Now you're going to?
Wingless airplane.
The wingless airplane-shaped pen. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So the wingless airplane kind of gives us a feeling of planes collapsing. So we may not want to go with that. But at the end of the day, we're going to go with the mountain-shaped pen. I like that. That's got that thing. Okay. Now, nobody was wrong. You weren't wrong. You weren't wrong. You weren't wrong. We got to come to a decision. How do we make the decision? The majority. There was only one person who was wrong. You were wrong, right? Because blue is not a shape, okay? Blue is a color. Now, what that means is the Ritva says that on every question, the Ritva says that on every halachic question, when you apply Torah properly, there are 49 possible ways to arrive at Tameh and 49 possible ways to arrive at Tahor, and all of them are legitimate. And kosher and not kosher, usher and mutter. There are 49 ways this way, 49. I don't think he even means limited to 49. What is the final decision? What your way and your way, it was all legitimate. What are we going to do is halacha, what the majority decides. As long as you're on the chart, it's you were on the chart, you were on the chart, you were on the chart. It's all legitimate. You were off the chart. You're reform. Right? That's reform. That's it. You are reform. That is not even a legitimate approach to halacha, because there's no blue shape. That's exactly what the Ritva is saying. It has to do with which way you're looking at it. Beis Shammai, Beis Hillel, they have different opinions. But as long as it's legitimate, that's Elu ve'elu divrei Elokim chayim. Elu ve'elu divrei Elokim chayim. As long as it's legitimate. As long as it's legitimate. what do we do for halacha? We paskin by the majority. Okay? That's what happened in the Beis Medrash here. Now, we still have a big question here, because remember I told you a story with Rabbi Simcha Wasserman? Simcha Wasserman was at a rabbinic convention. I told you the story. He was there. Rabbi Chanan Wasserman's son, Rabbi Simcha Wasserman, was one of the Gedolim here in Eretz Yisrael. So he was once at a rabbinic convention, and a reform rabbi came over to him, and he said to him, how come there's so many branches in Judaism? Why don't we all become one branch? For shteitzach, reform, Why don't we all become one branch? So Simcha Wasserman said, listen, Judaism, we're an army. We're Hashem's army. In every army, you have different branches. You have the Air Force, you have the tanks, you have the Navy, you have the Marines, you have this espionage, you have every branch. So the guy says, in what branch of the army are the reform? He says, every army has deserters. He started up. He was hawking, so he got what he deserved. Now, if you open up the Mishna in Pirkei Avos, in the Mishna, in the second parak, the sixth Mishnah, the eighth Mishnah, according to the Cedar, it's the seventh, it's the ninth. I think in the regular Cedar, it's the sixth or seventh Mishnah, in regular structure of the Mishnayos. So it says, Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, the Mishnah says, Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, who was the leader of the Jewish people at the time of the second Basin Mikdash, Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, he's the one who went out to negotiate with the what do you call it, with Vespasian. The Gemara in Gittin says he went out to Vespasian and asked Vespasian to spare three things. The Gemara in Gittin talks about he was the leader of the Jewish people. He had 5 Talmidim. And the Mishnah lists 5 Talmidim, and it says the praise of their Talmidim. Rabbi Eliezer ben Hyrcanus, which is this Rabbi Eliezer, who's called Rabbi Eliezer HaGadol. The background of Rabbi Eliezer HaGadol is he went off to yeshiva when he was 22 years old. According to the version, he was 28 years old. His father disowned him for going off to yeshiva. Sound familiar? History only repeats itself. Right? His father disowned him. His father, Hyrcanus, was a very wealthy man. The end of the story was that his father came up to the yeshiva of Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai. And when Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai saw his father, he told his son, Rabbi Eliezer, who he hadn't seen for many years, he didn't recognize him, he said, I want you to get up and give the drasha today. So Rabbi Eliezer got up and gave the drasha, which is the first medrash that we have. It's called Pirkei de Rabbi Eliezer. It's 54 or 56 chapters. That was the drasha, which must have taken somewhere between 6 to 8 hours. Right? It's a long drasha in those days. In those days, it wasn't like 15 minutes and a coffee break. It was a drasha. At the end of the drasha, the father was then introduced and says, this is your son, Rabbi Eliezer. He says, oh, I didn't realize. So then he gave all his money to him and he disowned all the other sons. He cut all the other sons out of the. I love when that happens. So he was one of the Talmidim of Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai. Rabbi Eliezer ben Hyrcanus, Rabbi Yeshua ben Hanan, Rabbi Yossi HaKodesh ben Asad, Rabbi Eliezer ben Arach. 5 Talmidim that he names. Then now listen to the statement of Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai. He said, he mentions the praise. He says Rabbi Eliezer ben Hyrcanus was a cemented pit that never lost a drop. That means he never lost his learning. Listen carefully, stay with me. He said, if you would put all of the sages on one side of the scale, Eliezer ben Hyrcanus bekaf shnia, and you put Eliezer ben Hyrcanus on the other side, machria is kulam, he would outweigh all of them. That was the praise of the Rebbe for his Talmud Rabbi Eliezer ben Hyrcanus. Now let me ask you a question. If Rav Elyashiv Zatzal would walk into this room right now, we have a halachic shaila. And all of us have decided that something is usr, or mutter, I don't care which direction it goes. We all decide it's usr. And Rav Elyashiv Zatzal, the Posek Hador, would be here, and he would say to us, I learned the sugya, I think it's mutter. Would you maintain your opinion? You could, right? There are a lot of are you allowed to? You're allowed to do a lot of things in life, right? The question is not what we're allowed to, the question is what we would do. I would assume that Rebbe Elyashiv could pack in the whole bunch of us, right, with lots and lots and lots of room to spare. Now, why is that? And there is a concept called a Muffler Basin. Normally, you have a Basin of 23. Every judge gets one vote. Every judge gets one vote. The only time that changes is you have somebody who's a Muffler Basin, meaning he outranks everybody. He's in a different league. He's in a different league than everybody. He's not in the same league. You could always have two things. You have the same league, but some are better than others. And that's how they sat in the Basin. They sat according to their rank of wisdom. But everybody got one vote, including the head of the Basin. Then you have a situation where somebody who's a Muffler Basin, he's simply in a different league than everybody else. Now, if you put all of our wisdom together, but there are a whole bunch of us in the room, there are 10 or 12 of us in the room, all of us against Rav Elyashiv? No. I still go with Rabbi Elyashiv. Somehow I still go with Rabbi Elyashiv. Right? I still go with him. Right? That's interesting. The Bali Musar compare it to imagine there are 100 cows in a room. And I don't mean to compare us to cows just yet. Right? There are 100 cows in a room, and somebody clicked the door, locked the door with a key. Would 100 cows figure out how to unlock the door? Why not? Look at all those brains, right? And if 100 cows doesn't work, so we'll put in another 900 cows. Now there are 1,000 cows in the room. Would they put their heads together and figure out how to unlock their door? No. A 6-year-old child comes into the room, and the 6-year-old child takes one look, he fiddles with it, he figures out what happened, what changed. There's only one thing that changed. He's a different species. It's not that he's a little sharper than them. He's in a completely different league. A Rav Elyashiv who walks into this room, it doesn't matter, all of us with all of our immense wisdom pooled together, but Rav Elyashiv just is a different league. We wouldn't even think, it wouldn't cross our mind to argue with him. What did the Rebbe say over here, Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai? He said if you put everybody on one side of the scale, Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, Rabbi Elazar Agadol, he'd outweigh everybody. Rabbi Elazar was saying to them, you're right, you're good, but I'm not one vote. I outweigh all of you put together. The Rebbe said so. Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai said so. Rabbi Yeshua said, you're right, you're the best, but you're one vote. You don't outweigh all of us. The argument in the Beis Medrash was essentially, what is Rabbi Elazar's status? Where does Rabbi Elazar, what is his? Is he outweighs everybody? Like the Rebbe said, and we're taking that literally? Or does the Rebbe mean that he's greater than everybody, but he still gets only one vote? And the Chachamim voted on that very issue. And on that very issue, they said the majority rules. The majority rules, you're good, but you're not outweigh all of us. And therefore they put him in Cherem. They put him in Cherem because the whole Torah is threatened. The Vilna Gaon says, why did he use these signs? Why did he use these signs? He brought in the, what's it called, the charuv, the carob tree, and the water, and the walls of the Beis Medrash. The Ben Ish Chai, by the way, says it wasn't the actual inner walls of the Beis Medrash. That would be kind of dangerous. There was a wall outside the base, a protective wall outside the base. Whatever the case is, what was Rabbi Elazar trying to do? He was trying to prove this very point. He said, in order to master Torah, the first thing you need is you need to separate yourself from physical pursuits. You need to devote yourself single-mindedly to Torah and to try to cut yourself off as much as possible from this world. What's the ultimate sign of that? We find two examples of it in the Gemara. One is, where do we find carob trees, gentlemen? Brachas, it certainly talks about the way what you make on carob trees. Where do we find? Correct. Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai and his son, Rabbi Elazar, when they were in a cave for 12 years, what did they eat? Carob tree. Right? They had a carob tree. Carob tree represents bare sustenance. So he said, the carob tree will prove it because I'm a person completely separated myself from any worldly pursuits to master Torah. He said, okay, we're impressed, but it doesn't do it. He said, what's the next ingredient you need to learn Torah? You need humility. Because you can't absorb knowledge if you think you know it all. You got to constantly be humble enough to hear somebody else's opinion and to grow and to add to your knowledge. Water represents humility because water always goes to the lowest level. Water represents, among other things, water represents humility. Water always sinks to the lowest level. So he said, I've got humility. And by the way, don't be puzzled about that statement, that I've got humility. I am more humble than you, right? It does sound a little bit puzzling. That sounds a little bit puzzling, but then again, who's the most humble man in history?
Moshe.
How do you know?
It says in the Torah.
Who wrote it?
Moshe.
Yeah. No one was ever as humble as me. Right? You hear the irony over here. So obviously it's being dictated by a Kodesh Baruch Hu. Humility means you recognize your humility. You recognize who you are. And number 3, you could be humble and you could be separated from all the material pursuits of the world. There's the last ingredient you need is what? In order to become a Talmid Chacham, what do you need? You need to learn Torah. That's the walls of the Beis Medrash. And Rabbi Elazar is showing I've got all the ingredients. That's why I am number 1. I am outweigh everybody here in the Beis Medrash. And again, that has nothing to do with haughtiness. He's telling you that's how we paskin halacha because I know more. If you start arguing with a doctor, and you don't know what you're talking about, and the doctor says to you, I went to medical school for 6 years. I know what I'm talking about. He's not being haughty. He's just telling you the facts. I'm an expert in this field. You're not. I know this field better. And they put him in chayrim. You're right, but we're right. Right? And you can't argue with us. It's too threatening to Torah. That's what it means over here, achrei rab lahatos. In our day and age, we don't have Sanhedrins, but there is a concept of looking at what's the weight of the mainstream rabbis where they're going. And everybody says, well, we have our rabbis, We're talking about the biggest Talmidei Chachamim. What is the weight of opinion of the majority? We don't have an official Beis Din. We don't have an official Beis Din today. But there is a general weight and a general drift and a general of the Gedolim, and that's how we determine our policy, unless you have a specific Rebbe. But there is that concept, which the Gedolim themselves will tell you what the weight of opinion is. Okay, that's what that's what was going on in the Beis Medrash. Okay, then the Torah says like this, and pasuk at the bottom of 432. You see the donkey of your enemy crouching under its burden. So you're supposed to help him. Top of page 434. So here the commentaries talk about, well, how do you even have an enemy? There are 2 types of enemies. There's somebody who's a sinner. You're allowed to hate him. You're allowed to hate a sinner. The irony is that the sinners sometimes hate us. And the Gemara says in Psachim, that more than there's something called an am ha'aretz. You ever heard the expression an am ha'aretz? What does it generally mean? Huh? A regular dude, it's even less than a regular dude. An am ha'aretz is generally an ignoramus. And at the time of the Gemara, an ignoramus were actually people who were enemies of the Talmidei Chachamim. And the Gemara talks about the hatred of the Am Ha'aretz to the Talmidei Chachamim. In our day and age, it's the people we would call people who are ignorant. It's not their fault. You have the people who are anti-religious. That's really, the Gemara makes a shocking statement. The Gemara says, more than the anti-Semites, more than the non-Jews hate the Jews, the Amoratzim hate the Talmidei Chachamim. It's a shocking statement. And more than that, Rabbi Akiva says, Rabbi Akiva said this, when I was an Am Ha'aretz, I said, who will give me a Talmid Chacham so I could bite him like a donkey? So his Talmidim said, why a donkey? Why not a dog? He says, because a dog bites, but he doesn't crush the bones. When a donkey bites, he crushes the bones. Rabbi Akiva said, that was his resentment towards the Talmidei Chacham. That was Rabbi Akiva says that. Open statement, Rabbi Akiva. So the question is where does this resentment stemming from? And you find this, it's remarkable. Any of the anti-religious people here, specifically here in Israel, if they have respect for every religion, respect the Muslims and respect the cat, respect for everybody, except for the Frum. Remarkable. Why is that? Where's that coming from? To a certain extent, there's jealousy. When I was in high school, we had in the Yeshiva high school, so we had secular Jewish teachers for the secular subjects. We had secular Jewish teachers and we had non-Jewish teachers. The non-Jewish teachers, almost to a man, put on a yarmulke when they came to teach us.
What?
The non-Jew, almost to a man, the non-Jewish, not every one of them, but almost most of them. The secular Jewish teachers, almost to a man, did not. Isn't that remarkable? Why is that? Why is that? Because the non-Jewish teacher came in there. You want me to put this on? I'll put this on. You want me to stand on the table and crow like a rooster? I'll do that also if that's what you're really. I don't care. It doesn't. I mean, as soon as I walk out those doors, this comes off. The secular Jew, who in his heart of hearts suspects that maybe these guys are right, I've got to show that I don't believe in any of it. Because if I'm doing this, I should be doing more. So Rabbi Yankel Galinsky says, there's a guy comes to the rabbi. He says to the rabbi, listen, I want to do a mitzvah. I'm going to do a mitzvah, a big mitzvah. So he takes a lantern, and he goes outside his house, and he lights this lantern. And he says, the lantern is going to, because outside it's dark, it's pitch dark. People could fall, and people could trip on things. He puts out this lantern. He's going to do a public good, a public mitzvah. He'll put out a lantern at night so that people can walk past his house and not stumble. Oh, he feels good. He puts out the lantern. He goes to sleep. He's doing his mitzvah. He wakes up in the morning. He comes outside. The lantern's smashed to smithereens. So he goes to the rabbi. He says, Rabbi, I tried to do a mitzvah. Now the somebody went and vandalized my lantern. The rabbi says, look, you get reward for the mitzvah. You did the mitzvah. You tried to do the mitzvah. You get the mitzvah. But you have to understand, there are a lot of people outside who need your lantern. And a lot of people walk past. They need the lantern to go. But just remember, there's also a group of people who don't want that lantern there. Who's that? That's the robbers and the thieves. They got to do their work at night, and they want pitch dark. So when they come walking past, they see a lantern, they smash the lantern. That lantern bothers them. He says, unfortunately, you have the people who look at the Torah ohr. The Torah is light, and that gives us light and guidance in life. The Torah gives us light and guidance in life. But you have a group of people who don't like that light. That light annoys them. Right? That's the people who are anti-Torah. So what they do is they have to smash the Torah because the Torah is interfering with the way they want to live. They want to live without rules, without restraint, without restrictions. So that Torah annoys them. That's where that resentment is coming towards the Torah faithful. Because you represent their conscience. You are the conscience. It's like, I hate to quote Hitler, but Hitler hated the Jews. Hitler wrote openly that the Jews are the conscience of mankind. Because the Jews teach mankind how to live. That's why he hated the Jews. Within Klal Yisrael, you have the same thing. The people who are faithful to Torah make the other people uncomfortable. They feel very uncomfortable around because you represent what they know in their heart of hearts that they should be doing. Here, there's another halacha. When it says that you have to help your enemy, it says your enemy's donkey is crouching under his load. You have to help him unload. You mean, what if he's your friend? It says your enemy's donkey. What if it's your friend? So Gemara, what's that? Obviously, Kal Chomer. So Gemara says, what if it's both of them? Your enemy is over here, 100 yards away, and your friend's 100 yards away with his donkey. Who do you help first? Why? You're right. Why?
Because he has a stronger Yitzhahara.
Because if you help your enemy, he won't be your enemy anymore. Maybe your friend will turn into an enemy now. Hey, why are you helping him, bro? What about me? What am I? Chopped liver? No. The Torah says he knows the halacha. He knows the halacha. You got to go to him. That's the halacha. Why? Because if you help him, maybe things will change. That's what the halacha says. The Noda B'Yehuda, Rabbi Cheskel Landau. This is the source, by the way, for Tzar Balei Chaim. You're not allowed to torment living creatures. Not to cause pain to animals. Not only that, if you're going to eat lunch, you have to feed your animals before you eat. If you have pets, you have to feed them. If it's their feeding time, you have to feed them before you feed yourself. And the Torah is very, very, you're not allowed to just go and torment animals. You're allowed to use them, you're not allowed to torment them. So the Noda B'Yehuda, Rabbi Cheskel Landau, who was the biggest posek, he was at the time of the Vilna Gaon, right around the time of the Vilna Gaon. It's called the Noda B'Yehuda. He's one of the mainstream books of the fundamental foundations of Psak Halacha. Poskim nowadays, when they want to check formulate halacha, they check the Noda B'Yehuda, the Chassam Sofer. These are the people who are on the syllabus. So he got a letter, he got a question once. These are his correspondences, but they became like Rav Moshe Feinstein's correspondences. They made it onto the syllabus as the foundation of halacha. So he was asked the following enchanting question. There's a Russian Jew, very wealthy, and he owns tremendous forest lands. And he wants to know if he's allowed to go hunting for sport. He doesn't need the animals, he doesn't need the hides, he doesn't like to eat them, he just likes to go, enjoys going out. He relaxes by shooting animals. Is he allowed to do that according to halacha? Is there a problem or not? What would you say? Tzar Balei Chaim. So that's what we would think. And the Noda Yudah says to him, by the letter of the law, since animals were given to us for our use, and you're using the animals to relax, it relaxes you to go out, that's how you get your enjoyment. By the letter of the law, it wouldn't be forbidden. Then he says to the guy, on the other hand, we only find 2 hunters in the Torah. One is Nimrod, who rebelled against God and caused mankind to rebel. And the other is Esav. Right? What does it say about you as a person if the only way you could relax is by going out to the forest and shooting animals? And then he says, and then, besides that, it's dangerous to go into the forest because there are all sorts of wild animals. Therefore, it's prohibited because the Torah says, "V'nishmarta ma'od l'nafshosechem." You're not allowed to engage in activity which is dangerous if it's not for your parnasa, for just because you feel like it. And therefore, he says it's usur. But as a activity per se, it doesn't fit into the Tzar Balei Chaim. What do you say, Matt?
Could be for your panasa. You could sell those animals.
But his question, if then there wouldn't be any question. Then there'd be no question. If you're trapping or hunting for an animal, then there'd be no problem. For food, there'd be no problem. He was saying clearly, I enjoy the idea of shooting them. I'm not using them, I'm not using the hides, anything. I just like that idea of shooting them. Right? And he says that's not something we do. That's not something we do because it's from a Musar point of view you shouldn't be doing. But second of all, it's if you're going out into the forest in Russia, so they're wild animals, then it's inherently dangerous. All right, TBC.